Some folks move to retirement communities for peace and quiet. I moved to Harborview Estates after 35 years of practicing property law, thinking I'd left the battles behind in my downtown office. I should have known better when the HOA president herself showed up at my door with a rule book thicker than the Bible before my boxes were even unpacked. If you've ever dealt with an HOA that seems drunk on power, you'll want to subscribe to my channel. Hit that notification bell while you're at it, and share your own HOA horror stories in the comments below. You won't believe what happened to me just for putting up a simple fence. It started innocently enough. After settling into my new home on the lake, I decided to install a fence. Not for privacy, mind you, but to keep my golden retriever from wandering into neighbors' yards. Nothing fancy, just a standard 4-foot white picket fence that matched the neighborhood's aesthetic perfectly. I checked the HOA guidelines thoroughly before hiring a contractor. The rules stated that fences couldn't exceed 6 feet, had to be white or natural wood, and required written approval before installation. I submitted my application, complete with diagrams and material samples, and waited. 3 weeks passed with no response. When I called the HOA office, the administrative assistant told me they were backlogged, but that no news was good news. In my experience, silence often means either approval or incompetence. I was about to find out it was both. The fence went up on a Tuesday. By Thursday, my doorbell was ringing with Mrs. Henderson, president of the HOA board, and, according to neighborhood gossip, a woman who measured grass height with a ruler. "Mr. Peterson," she said, not bothering with a greeting, "your fence is in violation of at least 4 HOA regulations." I invited her in, offered coffee, which she declined with a sniff, and asked for specifics. "For starters," she said, pointing a perfectly manicured finger at my paperwork, "you never received written approval." "I submitted the application 3 weeks ago," I replied calmly. "Your office said no news was good news." "That's not what we said at all," she insisted. "And even if you had received approval, which you didn't, your fence is 3 inches too tall." I raised an eyebrow. "It's exactly 4 feet, as specified in the guidelines. From the ground level, not from the highest point of your sloped yard," she said triumphantly. "And the posts are the wrong shade of white." I couldn't help but smile. "They're standard white, same as half the fences in this community." "Not the right standard," she said, handing me an official-looking document. "You have 30 days to remove the fence and pay a fine of $500 for the violation." I looked at the notice, then back at her. "I'll appeal this, of course." "Be my guest," she said with a tight smile. "But the board meets quarterly and decisions are final. You wouldn't believe what happened next." 2 days later, I received another notice. This one stating that my fine had increased to $2,000 for failure to comply with immediate removal order. I hadn't even had a chance to respond. To the first notice, I called the HOA office and requested a hearing. The date they gave me was nearly 3 months away. Meanwhile, the fines continued to accumulate, $500 per week for each week the fence remained. By the time my hearing date arrived, the total fine had reached $10,000. $10,000 for a fence that cost less than half that to install. The hearing was held in the community clubhouse, with all 5 HOA board members present, including Mrs. Henderson, who presided over the proceedings like a judge at a sentencing. "Mr. Peterson," she began, "you've willfully violated our community standards, ignored multiple notices, and shown contempt for this board's authority." "I've done no such thing," I replied evenly. "I followed the application process, installed a compliant fence, and have been met with what appears to be a campaign of harassment." A man I recognized as Dr. Williams, the board treasurer, spoke next. Your non-compliance has set a dangerous precedent. If everyone ignored our rules, this community would descend into chaos. I haven't ignored any rules, I insisted. I've asked repeatedly which specific regulations my fence violates, and I've yet to receive a clear answer. Mrs. Henderson shuffled some papers. We've provided you with multiple notices outlining the violations. You've provided me with increasing fines and threats, but no actual evidence that my fence violates any reasonable standard, I countered. The board members exchanged glances. Finally, Mrs. Henderson declared, "The board has reached a decision. You have 14 days to remove the fence and pay the total fine of $10,000. If you fail to comply, we'll place a lien on your property." I stood up slowly. "I believe you're making a serious mistake. Are you threatening us, Mr. Peterson?" Mrs. Henderson asked, her eyes narrowing. "Not at all," I said with a small smile. "I'm simply stating a fact. If this HOA sounds unbelievable already, make sure to hit subscribe. You don't want to miss how this ends." I left the hearing feeling frustrated but not defeated. What the HOA board didn't know, and what I hadn't seen any reason to mention, was that before retiring, I had spent 35 years as a property rights attorney, specializing in HOA law. I went home, poured myself a bourbon and began drafting a response. I started by reviewing every HOA document I could find, the bylaws, the covenants, the meeting minutes from the past 5 years. What I discovered was shocking, even to someone who had seen decades of HOA abuse. The board wasn't just targeting me. They had systematically fined dozens of residents for minor or imaginary violations, often increasing the fines before homeowners had time to respond. They had failed to follow their own procedures for hearings and appeals. They had even spent HOA funds on personal expenses, including a retreat at a luxury resort that had somehow been classified as board training. Most importantly, I found that their fence regulations had been amended 3 years ago, but never properly filed with the county or sent to homeowners. The slope measurement requirement Mrs. Henderson had cited didn't legally exist. I spent the next week gathering evidence, interviewing other residents who had been targeted, and preparing a case. Then I filed a lawsuit, not just against the $10,000 fine, but against the entire HOA board for misconduct, harassment, and misappropriation of funds. The response was swift and vicious. 2 days after they were served with the lawsuit, I received an eviction notice, claiming I had violated the community's character clause. They also filed a lien against my property for the $10,000 fine, plus legal fees they claimed to have incurred. The neighborhood was buzzing. Some neighbors avoided me, worried about being associated with my rebellion. Others quietly approached me with their own stories of HOA abuse. Then came the false hope twist. At the next community meeting, Mrs. Henderson announced that the board was willing to settle with me. They would drop the fine and the lien if I would remove my fence and drop my lawsuit. I considered their offer, then countered with one of my own. They would drop all fines and liens, pay my legal fees, and resign from the board. They laughed, actually laughed, and then they did something I never expected. They increased the fine again, this time to $25,000, and accelerated their eviction proceedings. That's when things got really interesting. I subpoenaed their financial records, and when their lawyer objected, I brought in a favor from an old colleague, a judge who owed me one. The court ordered the HOA to produce 5 years of financial records, meeting minutes, and correspondence. What we discovered was beyond anything I had imagined. The board had been using HOA funds for personal expenses for years, vacations, home improvements, even cosmetic surgery for Mrs. Henderson, classified as board member wellness expenses. They had fined residents selectively, targeting those they disliked while ignoring violations from friends and family. They had never properly elected several board members, instead appointing friends to vacant positions without proper votes. Most damning of all, they had been using the HOA's legal fund, the EDIA, one funded by our dues, to hire their personal attorney to fight residents who challenged them. Amended my lawsuit to include criminal charges of fraud and embezzlement. And I contacted the local district attorney's office, where I happened to have a former student working as a prosecutor. The news broke on a Tuesday morning. Sheriff's deputies arrived at the homes of all 5 board members with search warrants. The local news vans weren't far behind. Can you believe they actually did this? Subscribe now so you'll never miss another crazy HOA story. The community meeting that week was standing room only. Residents who had previously been afraid to speak now came forward with their own stories. One couple showed how they had been fined $5,000 for planting the wrong color flowers in their garden. An elderly veteran described being threatened with eviction for flying an American flag. Another resident revealed that the board had refused to approve his wheelchair ramp, claiming it didn't match the community aesthetic. By the time the case went to court 3 months later, I had assembled a mountain of evidence and a coalition of more than 50 residents willing to testify against the board. The courtroom was packed on the first day of the trial. Mrs. Henderson and the other board members arrived with their expensive attorney, looking confident and unbothered. That confidence lasted until I took the stand. "Mr. Peterson," their attorney began, "isn't it true that you willfully violated HOA regulations by installing a fence without proper approval?" "No, that's not true at all," I replied calmly. "I submitted a complete application and received no response within the time frame specified in the HOA's own bylaws." "But you were aware that the fence violated multiple regulations." "No, I wasn't," I said, "because the regulations you're referring to were never properly adopted or communicated to homeowners." He shuffled his papers. "And you retaliated against the HOA board by filing this frivolous lawsuit?" "Not at all," I said. "I filed a legitimate lawsuit against a board that has systematically violated state laws, their own bylaws, and the trust of the homeowners they were supposed to represent." The attorney smirked. "And what qualifications do you have to make these determinations, Mr. Peterson?" I paused for dramatic effect. "Well, for starters, I practiced property law for 35 years before retiring. I specialized in HOA disputes and homeowner rights, and I taught property law at the State University for 15 of those years." The look on their faces was priceless. The attorney actually dropped his pen. Mrs. Henderson turned pale. The judge allowed me to continue, and for the next 2 days I presented evidence of the board's misconduct, financial records, testimonies from other residents, expert analysis of their violations of state HOA laws. Their defense crumbled. First, the board members turned on each other. Then their attorney withdrew from the case, citing ethical concerns. Finally, Mrs. Henderson broke down on the stand, admitting to everything when faced with irrefutable evidence. The judge didn't just rule in my favor. He dissolved the entire HOA board, appointed a temporary receiver to manage the community's affairs, and referred the case to criminal prosecutors. 2 months later, Mrs. Henderson and the other board members were indicted on multiple counts of fraud, embezzlement, and harassment. They eventually pleaded guilty, receiving probation, community service, and orders to pay restitution to the homeowners they had wronged. As for me, the judge not only dismissed the $25,000 fine, but ordered the former HOA board to pay my legal fees and an additional $50,000 in damages for harassment. I used that money to start a non-profit organization to help homeowners fight abusive HOAs. And my fence, it still stands, a symbol of standing up to bullies who think they can push people around. The irony of it all is that I never wanted conflict. I just wanted to enjoy my retirement by the lake with my dog and my fishing pole. But sometimes the universe has other plans. And sometimes the person you're trying to push around happens to have exactly the skills needed to push back. If you're dealing with an HOA that seems drunk on power, remember my story. Know your rights, document everything, and don't be afraid to stand up for yourself, even if you're not a retired lawyer with 3 decades of experience fighting these battles. What's the craziest HOA fine you've ever heard of? Share your stories in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this story, make sure to like and subscribe for more tales of justice served against those who deserve it most.